And I think sometimes people think they can go from here to there really quickly. But actually, if you're kind to yourself and you just give yourself some space to shut yourself away and make those things happen, then I think if it's meant to be, it does.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, that's a lesson that will get you to where you should be on something else.
Welcome to Imprint, a podcast about creating a home and life you love. I'm Natalie Walton, an interior designer, stylist, and best-selling author focused on an holistic approach to homes. Each week, I'm sharing insights and interviews about the creative process to help you enhance both your interiors and well-being, as well as provide you with the tools and resources to make considered and sustainable choices with all that you create.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Imprint. I'm very excited to share today's conversation with you. It is with Ali Heath, who is a UK-based interiors journalist, stylist, creative consultant, interior designer, and author who has about 20 years experience working in the world of interiors, magazines, as well as with private clients. And some of you will definitely be familiar with her first book, which is called Curate. She created that with Australian interior stylist Linda Gardner and also Australian photographer Marnie Horson, who has also been featured on the podcast. And as we go live with this episode, her second book called Create will be about to hit the bookshelves. It's all about mixing new and old pieces in the home, and be sure to go and check out that. I hope that you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. It's all about her creative journey, all about the worlds of interiors and how the world of magazines has changed and what she is pivoting to next. So please enjoy Ali Heath. Hello, Ali. I'm so excited to have you join me for the podcast. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about all things interiors, your career, your books, all the things. So first of all, I really think it's interesting and insightful to get a little bit of a backstory to how you got to this point, and kind of like to go, back to childhood and those early years of, did you have an inkling then when you look back that you were creative as a child, or were you surrounded by creative parents? What was your kind of childhood like, getting to those points where you're having to decide what you want to do after school?
Hi, Natalie. Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me on. I love your podcast, so it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to chat with you. Growing up, there was definitely creativity around, but it wasn't sort of formal creativity. I think my mum was a stay-at-home mum. She was a dressmaker. She made loads of our clothes. She knitted. She was always knitting, doing tapestry, baking. And we, as small kids, we did have lessons and things with her sort of every week. So it was definitely sort of a unknowingly creative house. My dad was in a corporate job. And I think later in life, he definitely loved to draw, and he was always good at carpentry and woodwork and carpentry. But it wasn't, I didn't have any interior people in my life or any sort of big role models. So I guess at school I always loved English. So I think somewhere in my head, I sort of had a notion that I probably would like to write books of some description. It didn't ever really go on a path to becoming a writer. I always loved art, so was creative, but it was that sort of balance between being quite academic and, for my degree, I studied European business and German. So I kind of imagined that I was going to live in Switzerland. I wanted a gap year. I did a couple of ski seasons, and genuinely thought that I would I think we were the generation that were told that you could kind of have it all. And we're really encouraged at school to sort of be, business with studies was probably quite a relatively new subject. And I genuinely sort of thought that I probably would end up in a commercial company. I graduated and did the milk rounds, and graduated and went to work for Marks and Spencer's, which at the point their graduate program was one of the really good ones, and it was one of the only ones you didn't have to do psychometric tests to get onto, because I was awful at all of that. And I stayed with them for about 2.5 years, and ended up it was the year of all the redundancies. So I would naturally have applied to go into buying. But our intake was, you went into stores, and I became a commercial trainee and ended up at my second store. they had these lots of training sessions for all the grads going in. And my second store, I ended up meeting a girl who I'd met on my first induction day, who's now become sort of a lifelong friend. And we ended up at the chairman's store, and I ran home furnishings. So it was sort of a baptism of fire, slightly, into trusting your intuition. I think learning how to chat to people at quite a senior level at quite a young age, at 23, it could have been quite intimidating. But I really did love it. And I think it just gave me a taste of, I just wanted to explore things. I kind of wasn't ready to settle. I think I joined M&S thinking I would end up in the office, didn't want to wait. So after 2.5 years, we were appointed and moving on. I decided to go and work for a company called Kraft Foods and worked for them in marketing and sales, and then got excited about moving across to the agency world. We were on big ad campaigns for the brands we were working on. And the sort of the glamour of the agency side seemed much more compelling. So again, I moved again. And I remember being told by headhunters at that point that, you're sort of at that age where you are being, they do call you up. And I remember this one chap, and I can't remember his name, but the memory of him saying to me, you can be anything you want to be. You just have to believe it. I think now it's quite normal, isn't it? We're all quite multifaceted. If we're doing our own thing, I think that's actually become something that's okay, and is encouraged. Like you, with all the things that you're doing, you wear lots of hats. Whereas I think in my 20s, I sort of felt slightly like, oh, I'm moving around a little bit. When, if you're a doctor, or a lawyer, or, you're on a straight career path. And I never really felt that I had that. Agency life I loved. We were with a really dynamic, it was a sort of top 10 below the line agency.
So what does that mean?
The partners.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you? So
sorry,
because I saw that on your one of your bios about a below the line agency, and I was like, oh, okay, what actually, for people who aren't in that kind of world. And I should also add that for those of you who are listening into America, I know that Marks and Spencer is an incredibly established brand in the UK, but how would you describe Marks and Spencer to someone who is maybe not familiar with that brand? I mean, it's kind of like everything, isn't it? It's like they do clothing and, I mean, everything really. But it's not a department store.
At the time.
Yeah.
No, it's sort of it's quite a household brand, which, sort of back in the 90s, obviously it all keeps evolving. They're still a huge brand, but at that point they were launching food, they were doing clothing, homeware, huge food halls. They were, at that stage, they were really quite a force to be reckoned with. So they were brilliant training.
And was it?
Sorry if I'm speaking too quickly.
No. And was it like a general? Because you said you got in, you went into their program, and was that like a business program or just a sort of, what type of program was it? Was it like a particular niche?
They did. It was a graduate training program, and you either went in as a finance personnel, HR now, or commercial. And I went in as a commercial trainee. Okay. And they basically sort of moved you around a few stores. We got very lucky, I think, going into the chairman's it was the chairman's local. So the home furnishing section was the number 2 at that point in the business. So it was quite a lot of pressure. You'd sort of have this entourage of the chairman lived 10 minutes down the road. So literally, a couple of times a week he would be in, and all the head office directors would be in. So you had a lot of exposure. And I think you sort of had to learn on your feet. I learned to think on my feet a lot then. All our numbers would be given to us on a Monday, huge, great big, it's just sort of showing my age, but you'd be given these huge print offs. And literally we would all go home and chant in the bath, and you would be expected to know every product on the week and on the year, and then have an opinion about sort of trends and what was happening. So I think not going directly into a buying role, it was actually really exciting because you did influence buying decisions with the team that you were walking around.
Interesting.
And then the agency side.
Yeah. So what's the below the line agency?
So it's basically everything bar TV.
Right.
So we didn't do TV commercials. It was everything else, underneath that. So basically working with big brands to launch their products, to develop new ideas. And I was there for about 5 years and ended up running new business for them. So we were pitching, probably every 2 weeks to different companies. And it was brilliant. I loved it. It was very dynamic, lots of really buzzy people to be around. But I think I definitely knew I hit 30 and I definitely realized that actually I really wanted to do my own thing. And I definitely didn't want to have children in that environment. So it's sort of, my sort of progression into what I'm doing now was really quite, it's sort of serendipitous in a way. I left to set up randomly an antiques company. My best friend at uni, her parents were antique dealers. And I sort of would never forget, I mentioned her in the book, that I just never forget as a kid, I didn't grow up in a house with old things. Our furniture was all new and literally arrived at their house in Chester. And there were just outbuildings full of the most amazing stock, and their house was filled with, all these curios and gorgeous pieces. And I think somewhere it had just stayed in my head. And I hit 30 and just thought, actually, I really want to go and do my own thing. And I think as a couple, we probably definitely, my husband's corporate, he's got a corporate role. And I think we probably just both realised that actually to both keep going like that, sort of both working full on in big jobs, it wasn't the environment we wanted to bring kids into the world in. And we didn't have children at that point, but literally, I left agency, swapped my lovely sports car for a van, and within 4 weeks fell pregnant with Gracie. So everything sort of changed really quite quickly.
I'm curious.
And I traded for about 4 years.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just curious. Did you? Because to take that leap, to leave something that's quite secure, like you say, like financially, very financially secure, as well as, all the other sort of things of like you're an employee. Did you kind of save up a certain amount of money thinking like, I've got to have this much to kind of see me through? Or like, what was there any fear about kind of going, I'm going to do this big transition? Or had you reached a tipping point in some other way that you felt, no, I have to do this?
I think there was fear, but it was, we moved. So we decided to sell our house. It was our first house that we bought, and we made some money on the house. And I took out, it was a really nominal amount of money. I think I took out, my husband Ian agreed that I think I set aside, it's about £15,000 to start buying stock. And, I was probably quite a shopper. I liked nice clothes and I liked buying, I liked nice things. And it was on the proviso that I knew that for probably definitely for the first 2 years, that I didn't buy anything for me. It was just literally money to go into the business. And that had to keep me going. And that had to be sort of self-funding. If it didn't work, that was my pot to play with in a way. And I think I realized quite early on that I probably bought more than I sold, fell in love with more than I sold. And I think what I was doing evolved quite a bit. We nearly bought a shop in Tetbury. We nearly lived in Tetbury, but we decided that the commute would have been crazy for my husband, like sort of 3 hours each way. It was slightly bonkers. So I took some space in an antique centre. I had a really lovely sort of upstairs vaulted space. And from that, lots of things kind of fell out. I was approached by a couple of big retailers over here to buy antique stock for them, for their showrooms and for their high street stores. So that was sort of like another little revenue stream. And people approached me to come and do interior design projects for them. At that point, no one was really doing the whole French look, which was quite big at that point in the sort of early 90s. So it just sort of slowly evolved and grew. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just bought what I loved. And got stuck in, really. I then had my second child, so we've got two. And I think sort of 4 years in, I realised that actually getting up at silly o'clock to do fairs was quite crazy. It was okay with one. At 5 weeks, Gracie was coming in the van with me and I was breastfeeding her before I went buying stock at, the big markets. And that was okay with one. With two, when the other one was a toddler, it was slightly bonkers. So at that stage, I transitioned again and started doing consultancy. I went back to consultancy for the place that I had space in.
So was that
and got to know?
Was that consultancy back with the marketing people or in antiques?
Yes,
right, for the marketing.
So
company.
it was using my marketing experience, but for the people where I'd actually taken space in their antique centre.
Right,
and they wanted to sort of turn themselves into a lifestyle showroom. And I brought people like Mulberry on board, Cabbages and Roses, different retailers that came in and had concessions. And we started linking to magazines and doing advertising with magazines, research projects with mags. So I got to know a few editors. And that's really how the transition happened for me, sort of taking on styling and writing projects. It was a world that I didn't really know. I hadn't really had much contact with magazine editors direct. And at the same time, sort of while this was all happening, we had a couple of features done at home to promote what I was doing with the antiques. And I just thought, oh, actually, I love this. I was probably styling my house anyway without really realizing they were styling skills. And I've always loved writing. And I just thought, actually, now with two kids under 5, this is slightly bonkers going to all the antique fairs. So I just gave it a go. I teamed up with a photographer that came to shoot our house. And then some of the magazines gave me some really lucky breaks. So, yeah, I didn't really think too much about it, if I'm honest, Natalie. It was all, if you look back now, if people ask you how you got into what you're doing with editorial work, I think I was probably naive and slightly fearless because I didn't really know any better.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we can, it's only when we look back that it starts to make sense about, the path that we've been on and all those steps. But I think also, obviously they must have recognized in you that you did have a sense of being able to put spaces together, or your home was really presentable. It's easy to sort of say it was lucky, but it wouldn't have happened, I think, if that wasn't true. You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of, you still got to be able to have something that they value to want to be able to put it in their magazine or whatever it is. So then how long
Yeah,
did
that's
you,
true.
yeah, so how long did you end up then working with magazines and writing, and in what kind of capacity? Like, can you kind of paint the picture of then what that sort of stint looked like working as a journalist and a stylist for magazines? Was it finding homes, or was it initially just writing about homes, or what did that look like? And were you working for mainly just one or two mags, or was it like a whole host of them? Paint the picture of what that all looks like.
So I basically just started sourcing people whose spaces I liked, initially locally, shopkeepers. My first ever shoot was with the lady who has done my first book launch and will do the second one. And we've become really good friends. And at the point, she had no idea that I had never done a shoot for somebody before. And I think we sold that into Country Living and to the English Home. And, we were all thrilled. And then I just approached people whose style I liked, to be honest. It was very organic. I'm probably quite approachable as a person. And I'd started to build a website for my own work as an antiques dealer. So there was evidence of the fact that I could put sets together or, items together, and I had a commercial presence. I didn't look like, there was something tangible behind me. But it really was just sort of seeking out people that I was interested in. And over the years, that's, I've written, well, I write, so still, it's still a big part of what I do, for all the quality interior mags and the weekend press. But it's generally in the UK, always people that I generally go and shoot. So I like to style the shoots and write about the person and sell that story in. So you've kind of got, I guess there's a bit of a control freak within me, that if I'm writing about someone, I like to be able to do that from the start to the end. And it doesn't always happen. For example, with Marnie, we do lots of work together now. Marnie Horson, your Aussie photographer.
Yeah.
We do lots of work together internationally. And that's lovely because she's feeding me a whole different rafter of international stories. Your look is very different to ours over here. So that was quite a fascinating step change. And I do that with other people now internationally. So I guess sort of, I think lockdown, we started working together prior to lockdown. But as a result of that, I think magazines over here have changed quite a lot. So although I'm still writing regularly for lots of UK titles, I do syndicate a lot of work now with our international library, Living Inside. And that obviously then goes to a global audience.
Yeah. So how about then finding photographers to work with? It's such an intimate relationship in a way, like when you're working with a photographer on a shoot. I've worked with so many different photographers, and they've all got, a different way of working. Just technically, they've got different personalities. How have you found what works well for you in terms of finding a photographer, and are the people that you tend to just work consistent? I know you've mentioned Marnie Horson, who's been on the podcast before. But yeah, I'm just curious, like what works for you?
In the UK, it's definitely, I think in the early days, I worked with a couple of people that I had two really good editors at Country Homes and Interiors. At that point was the mag, who both gave me some really good advice on people that they thought I would align really well with. I realised sort of quite early on it was dangerous having too many eggs in one basket. And different properties require a different skill set. I mean, and I'm sure you found it probably exactly the same, that, you know, some photographers are amazing at architectural shots or pulled back shots. And there are others that I work with regularly that I know from a detail perspective that they will always create that magic. They will find that the spot that you can see through the lens that you need your photographer to see with you. So I think building up a sort of a network of people that I work with has been sort of quite slow, but also quite deliberate. There have been some, you know, for example, like Michael Sinclair, Alexander James, whose work I saw regularly in magazines, and really wanted to work with them. So I think, you know, it's the same with all. I do quite a lot with Brent Darby, Alan Callender, Emma Lewis, and all of these guys have shot with me for my new book. And that was quite intentional, again, for the same reason that I think I would always match the photographer to the homeowner in the home. I sort of wanted to carry on that because I'm art directing and because I'm styling it. I think you keep that consistency of look because you sort of know what you want to achieve, whereas they've all got a slightly different skill set and their own little version of, you know, their magic that they bring. But I think after sort of 17, 18 years, you now know who's the right person on the right type of story. So it's been fun, and you know, and all of us have changed. All of our lives have evolved. So at some point, some people are shooting more and doing their own thing, and then so it sort of comes full circle. And for me, it's I love learning. I love every different photographer. It's bizarre; they all shoot in a completely different way. So I think I've actually learned quite a huge amount from each of them, just about the process. And I think if it's taught me anything, it's that it is really organic and there isn't one way of doing anything. And actually, whatever your way is, that's okay. It doesn't have to be formulaic. Whereas if I only shot with one person and then suddenly got thrown in, you know, on a commercial shoot or a shoot directly for a magazine with somebody whose style was very different, I think that could throw you if you weren't used to working with people. You know, I think giving people their space, and knowing, you know, integrity is a really big thing for me, in all, you know, in every area of my life. I think I tend to get quite close to all the people that I shoot with, and because they're people that I really want to work with, those relationships become really personal. So it's also knowing that someone you put in front of them has got the same kind of moral values and ethics as you, and will do a great job and won't try and, you know, the market for selling all of these features, you know, can be quite complicated, can't it? So I think it's really nice for me to have control. Whoever I'm working with, I do the selling. So I think there's peace of mind then for all the homeowners that you're putting them in the right publications, not just selling a story to earn a fee. It's because that mag matches their brand or their personality. You know, it's a good fit. It's not just a sale.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm curious as well to hear your perspective on, you know, the changing landscape of magazines, because obviously, you know, that was my world for a long time, and I kind of stepped back from doing the sorts of shoots that I guess you're still doing, you know, shooting other people's homes. I mean, if anything, I do that now more for either my books or through my brand Imprint House, and we do home tours and that kind of thing. So I'm still using that skill set, but in a different application. And I know for me, like one of the big things was, you know, in the early days, it was like magazines. I mean, when I was on staff, they were desperate to try and find homes because it was, you know, so challenging. This was before Instagram. And I feel like Instagram really changed the whole nature of it being so much easier for magazines to find homes. And so it wasn't as much of a challenge for, you know, for them, and if anything, with people were reaching out and all those things. And obviously, I'm sure it's very similar in the UK. You know, magazine sales have really gone down. You know, they're not where they once were. I mean, even I see, you know, the thickness of a magazine, you know, that's always a sign of the health of a magazine. Like once upon a time, they were so thick and filled with ads, and now it's all changed.
Absolutely.
I'm just curious to kind of get your perspective as someone who's still, I guess, working with magazines on a more regular basis. You know, how that is for you and what your perspective is on the industry in general.
I think it has become very much more about the accountants having a say over what happens in the magazine than the creatives. So for me, that is an issue, that it isn't the same as it used to be. I think there's still a huge place for print. And a really good example of that for me is Leanne Ford's new magazine, Feel Free. I think the market's ready for a whole shake-up with new bloods coming in. And, you know, I'd love to start a mag. That is on my sort of hit list of things I would love to do at some stage. I think the magazines certainly over here, they've become leaner in terms of the quantity of them, which I think is a good thing. Because there was a point where there were so many titles, but I think the people, the head creators on the mags and the editors, they're in a really tricky position, because you've sort of got bean counters at one end and creators at the other, and I think it sort of needs to come slightly full circle. I've been very, the market is changing, and I think for youngsters coming in, they are demanding rights, and they like to keep the rights now for work that's submitted. I've never done that, and I've never agreed to do that, which means that potentially you reduce slightly who you sell to. But again, for me, it's about integrity, and it's about, valuing yourself, really. I think having creative ownership and copyright of what you're producing is really important. And the titles that honour that, I think long term will be the ones that survive. But it's a tricky marketplace, because it's and you would know this, I think we've all been in it long enough to know how it works, but I do get asked really regularly by young people wanting to come and shadow you, or just, have a conversation. I think it is up to us to sort of try and educate the youngsters coming through as to how that process works, but whether they have the ability to do it in quite the same way that we are still managing to is another thing. And I guess that's the reason why I've probably diversified. So although I still shoot, I still style and write quite a lot for magazines, starting to do more books, to do more mentoring. I'm sort of my business is definitely in a process of transition at the moment. My website's all being developed, and my work is definitely sort of going in different tangents because of where magazines are at. I think it's, and also just because that's sort of, probably similar to how you are, you keep evolving. And I think if you're creative and you're hungry and you get excited and you're curious, actually, you don't want to sit still for too long. So there are so many other things that I think you realize you can go and do and be. But there is a core, and I whether that's writing about people or shooting people for books or for magazines, I do love that part of the job. I really like getting under the skin of people's storytelling, whether sort of visually or in words. I hadn't realised how important that was to me, but actually I think I get a lot from learning about other people. And I think in a way that sort of it's definitely made my own journey richer, because I think I've learned a lot from others along the way.
Yeah, it's Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe that, this idea of people, I mean, ironically enough, even though magazines are suffering, with sales and all of that and the industry changing, content, there's never been a more content hungry time than what we are right now.
No.
It's just in a different format. So like you say,
Yes.
it's just transferring those skills to something completely different. So, for me, it's like I said, I'm not doing it for magazines, I'm doing it for my own brand. But for other stylists, it might be that they're creating content for brands online on Instagram. I mean, I just know that, for even photographers that I talk to, like they're not shooting for magazines, but they're just so busy in other ways. They, because, even it's not just magazines that need content now. It's like every single brand out there needs content in some kind of
Absolutely.
way. So it's a kind of fascinating time in that sense. And I love what you say about Leanne Ford's magazine, kind of disrupting the industry a little bit in that sense, because we actually stock it at Imprint House and it's been, it just flies out the door. People, I think, like you say, are really hungry for, for a different take and a different, viewpoint. And yeah, I think that, any industry gets a bit formulaic. And so it's interesting to disrupt it in that way. So let's talk about your books, because obviously, well, I'm sure many people are very familiar with your first book, Curate, and which came out in June 2020. You created that with Australian stylist Linda Gardner, who is very well known in Australia as well as overseas. And I thought it was a really interesting concept, that book, of the two of you collaborating. And I remember when I first learned, before I actually got my copy, I was like, how are they going to do this? Like, I was just really curious. So can you share how that book came about, and how you came to be working together on it? And I know, because I've like I said, I've read the book, and I think it was created during lockdown as well, wasn't it? Or at least finished during lockdown. Wasn't
It
that part
was,
of the,
yeah.
yeah. So maybe can you just share a little bit about that book?
So basically, it came about because I'd actually been approached by Octopus to write the new book for the White Company, their second book, The Art of Living with White, which came out last September. And I just met with the creative director and the publisher, and we'd agreed terms to start that project, and was expecting contracts, within the next couple of days, when literally came home, woke up the next morning, and we'd entered lockdown. So that book went on hold for about 12 months. All my work, suddenly shooting work stopped, that was lined up. And I just pitched some ideas. I pitched about 5 ideas to my publisher, one of which was Curate. And I'd started working with Linda and Marnie, lovely Linda and Marnie, about 18 months before. And I was just really interested in, I think Linda had just launched Room and Board, one of her Airbnbs. And I was just interested in trying to write about new people, creatives that were doing great things outside of the UK. And we had quite a lot of material that had already been shot for forward features. So you guys weren't in lockdown. So I sort of had a concept around the notion of Curate. Linda's 7, 8 houses, or 7 for the book, worked really well to fit with that concept. And our intention had always then been that we would shoot 3 other Aussie properties to keep it sort of, because you guys weren't in lockdown. But then you did go, then obviously that the tables flipped and you were in the same position as us. Anyway, cut a long story short, the publisher really liked the idea. And they really liked the idea of it being sort of, across 2 parts of the world. So we would have sort of audiences in both places. And it wasn't really common for people to be collaborating like that at that point, I don't think. So yeah, it was just for me, it was a really lovely process during lockdown. I would art direct it from the UK. So with the books, and again, it's something that I didn't really realize until you're sort of involved in the process. I think I like this whole notion of being involved from the beginning to the end. It's really important to me. And they were a very good publishing house in terms of allowing, they gave me creative control to basically lay those pages out. So in order to be able to write it, we had all the shoots that Marnie had already done, I think bar 3. So a lot of the material was there for the team to see. And then we knew where the gaps were. So, I would have lovely conversations with Linda about, can you set this up? And she would go away and set up. We just have all these late night or really early morning conversations about the pages that we knew we needed the material for. So she was responsible for the styling of what needed to be done in Australia. And then I put the concept together and, wrote the pages over here in lockdown. So it was a really, it was a fun project, and it was, we wanted it to be a very collaborative process between the three of us. Often photographers aren't necessarily bought in on that. So we all share royalties, and it just felt like a very, it felt like for a first book, it was a really lovely team process. And I think with both of us, Linda's style is immensely recognizable. She's really established, and I love her style. And at home, mine is very much, we're very pared back, earthy mix, sort of earthy to monochrome in terms of how I decorate. So there were lots of synergies. I think creatively, we got each other. Marnie, who I've worked with for ages, I really get. And we work really well together remotely. It isn't necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily think that it could happen without actually meeting up in person, but it does.
Yeah, no, it's incredible that you've done that as like a remote kind of project. I mean, books can be challenging enough, let alone throwing in a lockdown and the incredible distance that you kind of had to overcome. So what about now? You've got at the time that this podcast goes live, your next book will be about to hit shelves, which is called Create. What was the guiding idea for that, and how is it different to Curate?
So Create is so the principle was being create, and the subhead is at home with old and new. So it was very much about how people bring together old and new in their home. And I think as the world is evolving, as sustainability is becoming more important, I wanted to show how a group of creatives had all followed their own path and were all very successfully mixing old and new together in what for me feels a really fresh way. Everybody that's mentioned in the book. So again, there's a front end, which is about encouraging you to trust in your creativity. So there's almost two things going on. There's the notion of mixing old and new, and there's the notion of creating freely and trusting your intuition and trusting your own style to do that for yourself, and to not follow trends, and to believe in yourself that you can put those looks together. So there are in a similar vein to Curate, there are lots of different steps that people can use as a sort of almost as a source book and a guidebook for triggering ideas about how you can, think about color, think about pattern and texture, think about lighting, think about your collections. But what I didn't want it to be, I think the same thing that we're saying with magazines about magazines becoming quite formulaic. I just wanted a book that would spark it would spark their own creativity just from the fact that you're not quite sure what you'll turn the page to. There's, we mix photography with illustrations, with copies quite punchy throughout. They're more sort of triggers for people to have the confidence in themselves. And I think that for me is a really important thing, like within the industry. Like I think the industry can have a reputation for being quite old school and quite hard to break into. Whereas I think it's important for people to realize that if you trust your own intuition, you don't have to have your home designed by an interior designer. You can just think slightly differently about how you're approaching what you have and what you use in a more sustainable way and in a more sort of organic way, and sort of connecting with your senses. So, what the idea of home for me is very much about engaging. It's at the heart of everything. It's at the heart of your happiness, your well-being. For me personally, my own creativity, it triggers so many different things. And I think it was about trying to create a book that didn't feel formulaic in terms of here are 10 houses and that's what you get when you flick through, which lots of interior books can be. It was more of a case of I really want to give you sort of triggers to try and inspire you on a journey, to be comfortable to mix old and new, and not think that you have to keep throwing things out and keep reinventing yourself all the time. Timeless is a good thing. And just to trust in the power of your own thought process. I think there's very much, working in the industry, and you probably, I'm sure, feel the same, that the idea of perfection, I think, is one that is really, we've sort of all been slightly sold a story on everything has to be perfect, and it really doesn't. So I hope that the pages will sort of inspire people to follow their own path, but to be really inspired by the mix of creatives that we've included. Have all had very different journeys, and they've all had their own sort of life less ordinary, and that was important. They haven't all come in from traditional backgrounds. So there's a mix of very sort of pared back, quite earthy, through to much more colourful, which is a transition. And again, it was important for me that we kind of covered off. It wasn't just a monochrome book, although there's a lot of monochrome in it, and a lot of earthiness in it. That it's about inspiring people, whether whatever their colour penchant is.
So what were these homes in the UK, or were these, like, again, was Mani the photographer, or did you, you said this when you worked with a bunch of different photographers. So are the homes mostly shot in the UK?
So there are a few abroad. There's 2 Australian, which Mani has shot for me. There's one Parisian house, a designer, Mariana Avenue, whose work I've adored for years. I'm delighted to have her in it. The rest of the 10 houses are all UK based. And then we sort of got slight guest appearance from a few others at the front of the book. So, for example, Milena Berger, who, again, I'm sort of a huge fan of her. I loved her in her fashion days for Day Berger, and then by Milena Berger, and then what she's been doing with her interior brands. I'm thrilled that she came on board. So there's a section in the front of the book that sort of talks about the modern grand tour, the idea of the modern grand tour. And there's a lovely Q&A with Milena in the front. So and a few other creatives that come into the colour section. So, they're all people who've inspired me on my journey. So it's a collective of really lovely, but very individual creatives who all have a very unique look. So I hope, for a reader, there's lots of new projects in here. There's quite a few of the properties have never been featured before. They've recently moved home or evolved their homes. So, there's lots of sort of very fresh material, which, I hope will inspire.
Yeah, no, it's very exciting. So you also touched on that you're going to do, or you are doing more sort of one-on-one consultations, that side of, sort of moving more towards that type of work. Can you share a little bit more about, your thoughts behind that, your approach to that, how it's going to look, maybe even how people can work with you if they're interested in doing that? Just curious about, how that's going to evolve for you.
Well, I've been doing one-to-one mentoring sort of quietly for quite a long time now, but I've never really sort of shouted about it. My time, because I work for myself and my team is me. I don't employ anybody at this stage, and I've purposely kept it that way. I have the luxury of being able to carve up my time sort of exactly how I want to. So quite particularly since Curators come out, and the White Company book, quite a lot of people have approached me who are at a crossroads in their own businesses. And I think because obviously with a background in retail and consultancy, selling antiques and then working editorially, there's lots of different touch points, which for a lot of creative individuals in business, I think is just sort of slightly resonated. And, a lot of that work has come from Instagram. I think people just sort of who connect. I think I've definitely found that my audience on Instagram has been one that the connections that have formed on there with certain individuals. It's been really powerful because I think you sort of cut to the chase really quite quickly, don't you, about whether you will connect with someone, whether your values align or your thinking aligns. And I'm really enjoying that. So I think that's definitely, I want to do more, and people can tap into that sort of on either a short-term basis for sort of 2-4 hours or 4-hour sessions, or longer, depending on the needs of their business. And that for me has been really fulfilling. It's really been really fulfilling, sort of going back to my strategy days. Because I think agency-wise, I always enjoyed both the creative and the strategic side of it. So, yeah, it feels. Suddenly it feels, actually this is the thing I've been doing for the longest in my career. I've been doing this now for 18 years, and there is a whole rafter of knowledge that actually is really lovely to share with people, and for them to tap into.
So can you give us some
and the same with design.
Yeah. Can you give us some examples of perhaps, the type of people who are coming to you, like with what kind of roadblocks they're having or issues, or I think that might be interesting for people to get an insight and even kind of go, yep, that's me.
I think on an independent company basis, I think a lot of people I think imposter syndrome is huge. I think, we've all suffered from it at different stages of our life. I definitely have. I sort of originally thought it was, you couldn't be all these things. And actually, who am I to have a voice in that industry? When actually, everyone deserves the right to have a voice if they've been doing something for long enough. And I think I've learned a lot about myself in terms of getting through that. And I think that those thoughts resonate where there's lots of small businesses that I think, particularly in the current climate, are either unsure of their own strategic direction and are not confident in that. And it's almost like having a mentor. I've had some lovely mentors in my life, and I think it's like having somebody that can sit, either you're really hands-on to help them with their strategy properly, or actually it's a sounding post that somebody wants to come and talk to you because you sort of know how their business will operate in a lot of different fields and what they need to have exposure to or access to. That I think I probably had a lot of that experience. and they feel comfortable sharing that. And I think when I'm interviewing people, that empathy. I think I probably have got empathy with people. I'm quite personable and down to earth. So I think it's not a scary environment for somebody to want to open up to you. Then the flip of that, I've also got corporates that are asking, also wanting just basic consultancy advice on creative projects. So it's sort of at both ends of the spectrum. And again, I really love that, because you're testing yourself all the time, aren't you? It's sort of, I like that my weeks are varied, and it's a privilege to have those insights into small businesses. And I think at the moment, transition is something that lots of companies are going through, and wanting to really sort of work out where to put their time and their money.
Yeah, no, great.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Yeah. Now, before we get on to the last sort of little batch of questions that I always go through, I just do want to ask you about Instagram. You've touched on it, and obviously it is an incredible marketing tool. It's an incredible way to create community, connection, all of those things. But, it can also be a big black hole, and it can be a huge
And I know you've had a disaster.
I know. I'm just curious, how do you choose to show up on Instagram? How do you use it? Do you have to set boundaries around it? It can be such a great tool, but it can also be a huge vice as well. And I always think it's interesting to get different people's perspectives on Instagram.
My relationship with it is very spontaneous, so I don't plan. I don't pre-plan content that's going up. It's sort of, if that's in my head that morning, that is what I post. I've tried to keep it quite real, so there's a little bit of, there's a presence of my work, there's a presence of my thoughts on subjects, a little bit of personal, because I always think I like to see a little bit of personal behind the people that I'm following. But I definitely could keep it slightly at arm's length, and I never get hung up about numbers, audience figures. I think I take it slightly with a pinch of salt. I think I have formed some really special relationships through it, that I definitely wouldn't have found in my work otherwise. But it isn't the be all and the end all. And I think building your own database is really important. And what I've stopped doing, I'm nearly 53, and I've probably gone beyond the pressure of, I look at people in their late 20s and 30s and, probably 40s. I think probably by your 40s, you're starting to feel very comfortable with who and what you are. But I think I have definitely gone through those learnings at a younger age. So I try not to look at what my competitors are doing, because I think actually we're all doing such a variety of things. Your competition isn't any one thing. It could be a whole multitude of things. So I just don't try to get too fazed by what other people are doing. I just do it for me. And in a way, it's almost... it becomes almost like a source book or a marker in time of where you're at in that week, that month, your travels, your creative inspirations. It's like a logbook almost. So I don't feel fearful of it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I use it for the creative side, but I just try not to get too hung up about it.
Sounds like a very healthy relationship with it. So it's definitely, it can be, I like what you say about to sort of not look at what other people are doing as well. Because I think that's another side of Instagram, particularly as a creative, is if you invest too much time or energy into kind of what other people are doing, and really you kind of need to create from your own wellspring of creativity and ideas and all of that. And that's the work that usually, stands out and lives on in many ways. So yeah,
Well,
I think it's
I
important.
really think so. And I think it's, similar to what we're saying, I'm saying in the book Create. It's, if you create a timeless, if whatever you create is timeless, whether that be how you dress yourself, your wardrobe, your home, your friendship groups, all of those things in life, I think if they become things that you genuinely only attach yourself to because you really love them, then I think that they stand the test of time. And there's a chance of longevity. Our homes will get worn around the edges, and we will all age, and all those things are going to happen naturally. And I think the pressure to show up on Instagram and to be perfect is really dangerous, because although that in your 30s that might be the way it is and you portray yourself in a certain way, by the time you get to your 50s and your 60s and your 70s, actually your creativity doesn't go away, but you'll probably not want to show yourself in quite the same way as you did when you were young. So I think, does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
no,
think it's
definitely.
just, I think creating creating something that's sustainable and that you can enjoy for what it is without feeling pressurized. And I think we was like with our kids, that I think you want your kids to grow up and to be grounded and to follow their own path and to be true to what they're thinking and their thoughts, not what somebody's telling them they think that they should be. I think we sometimes forget that for ourselves. And it's a really important lesson. I think being yourself, I think you asked me that was one of your questions, what would you tell your younger self? And I think it's just be true to you, be who you are, and being you is okay. And if you evolve and you change within the next 6 months or 12 months, that's good. That's just you growing. And but putting pressure on yourself to be something today that you're not, you're limiting your opportunities to be who you really could become, if you just took the pressure off.
Yeah. No, it is that thing of, isn't it? Like, we can sometimes be our own worst enemy with certain
Completely.
things. Yeah,
And
definitely.
we've all been, I've been guilty of that. We're all guilty of it. But I think it's just, I think perspective. I think when I left agency world, I did leave for a reason. And I do like to remind myself that I set up my own business to really enjoy my family. At that point it was just me and Ian, but now we've got two children that are, sort of nearly 18 and 20. Actually, that's what's important to me, that, we've brought lovely people into the world and we've kept our relationship strong, without losing sight of who you are. But if you're not yourself, those other things don't it's impossible for you to have good things around you, I think, if you're not actually kind to who you are, and whatever stage. So I think lots of people I'll often get lots of messages of I think anyone that's doing something creative, I think, that happens, doesn't it? People message you and say, how do you do that? And they're struggling because they haven't quite got there. And I think it's just not losing sight of, anyone that reads your books, or like with you, they see your gorgeous shop and they see you doing courses, and, actually that's a lot of hard work has gone into making all of those amazing things happen. But it hasn't happened overnight. You've had to be very deliberate about making those things happen. And I think sometimes people think they can go from here to there really quickly. But actually, if you're kind to yourself and you just give yourself some space to shut yourself away and make those things happen, then I think if it's meant to be, it does.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, that's a lesson that will get you to where you should be on something else.
Yeah, no, agree completely. And it's also that thing of it's like the small consistent steps over time, that's what gets you to where
Yes.
you want to be. I think it's so easy to sort of think, I want this thing, and I've been guilty of this, like, I want this thing to happen, and you kind of want it to like click your fingers and like will it to happen, but it really is just kind of like putting in the time and the effort and just chipping away at it, and it just, that's how it happens, and it's sort of being in there for the long term.
I need to interview you. I would really like to interview you properly about your journey. One day we need to do that.
Yeah, it's been a long one. So anyway, let's get to the final question. So which 5 words best describe you?
I would say creative, curious, personable, passionate, but that could also flip to demanding. I probably am, there's a double-edged sword with that, I guess. And I'm quite humble, sort of down, I am quite down to earth.
Yeah, great. What's the...
Is that 5? I think
yes,
that's 5.
It is. So what's the best lesson you've learned?
For me, it's trusting in your intuition. If you think that something's right or wrong, it genuinely is. And I think just go with your guts and listen to what you're actually really feeling. And 9 times out of 10, that will be, it's not necessarily what you think is right at the time, but if you really feel it, then believe in that and trust that.
What's your proudest achievement?
I would say probably, balancing, for me, it's not necessarily purely work, but I would say it's being able to find the balance between family and work. It was important to me to not lose myself when I had children, but it was also important for me to be around for them and for all their big milestones. And I think working for myself, I've been able to do both. And that does give me that has brought me a lot of happiness to know that I'm not having to race off to a job in London. I can build my life. I've built my work sort of around, also raising a family, which has been important. And
they're great. What's been your best decision?
Definitely to marry my husband. My husband, we're a good team, and that's been a long time now. So that's been a great decision. But on a professional level, to do my own thing and to make that break at a point when your career is sort of, you're on the up, and that was quite a big decision at 30 to do that, but it was definitely the best decision.
Who inspires you?
Gosh, lots of people. I'm inspired by all the creatives that I work with, whether that's photographers I'm working with, like Marnie and all my gorgeous UK guys and girls. Who inspires me? Well, these are sort of random ones. Nancy Myers inspires me with her films and how she kept evolving, and the way she portrayed homes in all of those beautiful film sets. That's definitely had a big influence on, I think, the idea of somebody creating a home that is a space that feels good to be in. Leanne Ford inspires me. Diane Keaton's on the cover of her mag this issue. Diane Keaton is a big influence in terms of somebody that just wholeheartedly believes in the power of creating and about letting go of perfection. Milena Berger really inspires. And Iris Apfel, I had the pleasure of interviewing her, and she was a really hard one to track down to interview. And that will sort of go down as probably, one of my favourite interviews. Somebody in their late 90s that has followed such a brilliant life. When she was doing her textiles with her husband, and then has completely reinvented herself as a fashion icon. I think for all the kids, coming up through from school, I think, she's a really good person. Read her books, look at what she's done. She stayed true to herself.
Yeah, she's amazing. What are you passionate
really
about?
Amazing. Gosh, not one particular thing, but sort of anything that catches my eye. So architecture, art, other people. I think energy is a huge thing. And I think you sense it in people. And that for me is, that's a huge trigger. If I sense that energy in others, I think the power of what you can create together, or how you can be inspired by others when you feel that buzz, I think is really special. Spirituality sort of does really, I am passionate about, not in a sort of a completely woo-woo way, but in a, and if you ever read Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic?
Yeah.
You ever read her book?
Yeah. No, it's brilliant.
Yeah. So it's really brilliant. And I think almost in a way, when I first read that, and it was quite a long time ago, that I think you have those own thoughts in your head, don't you? But her passion for creating and connecting with your sort of slightly higher self or spiritual self, that has been a big trigger for me. Again, to sort of do your own thing and be who you are, and to trust that things kind of happen for a reason.
Great. What dream do you still want to fulfill?
I would love to go and live in Italy.
Me too.
And I would love to go and do. We've just come back from Venice, and I think I'm probably feeling particularly inspired at the moment. But I would love to go and do a sculptor course in Florence, or just immerse myself in Italian. I'd like to learn Italian. I'd quite like to go back and do a history of art degree at some point. But equally, I'd also quite like to start a magazine, have a picture library. There are lots of things that are on my list of things I still want to do. And I don't think that, I think you can kind of juggle all of that, can't you? But travel is a big one. And I would like to carve out more time. I need to come to Australia. And just, I feel inspired when I travel. And I think you sort of forget, don't you, with lockdown, I think, of us all being sort of shut up for such a long time. It was so gorgeous to start traveling again, and I know that creatively it sparks lots of ideas for me when I switch off. I probably don't ever really switch off, but I think when I just step back from my usual life, I don't want to stop creating, and wherever that kind of takes me, I'd like to do more collaborations with people that are on, again, sort of similar mindsets. I'd like to create some products. So I've got lots of things that I still really want to do, which sort of relate back to, they all fit, but it's just different tangents, isn't it? And I think that's the trouble when you're creative. You've almost got to, I have to be quite, I do have to be quite sort of controlled with myself, because I do have the ability. I have lots of things in my head, and you obviously can't do it all at once. So
have to rein it in.
I have to learn to temper some of that sometimes. Yes.
You got to create another book beginning with C, because it's got to be 3 books. You can't have just 2 books.
I know, it does need to be a trilogy. I have got an idea. There is an idea.
It's got to begin with C, though. That. What is it going to be? Community, connection. Funny. It's going to be a C.
That's really bizarre. Somebody texted me on Instagram this morning about saying you need to do a third called community. That isn't the one that's in my head, but
yeah.
It's funny. It's the pressure's on, isn't it?
Yeah. It's going to be a verb. Okay. Sorry, I was going to say, speaking of books, what is there something that you've got on your bedside table that you're reading, or a coffee book? What's your favorite coffee table book at the moment? Yeah, what are you reading at the moment?
Well, I obviously love your books,
thank you.
and I must say that because I have enjoyed all of yours. And again, I've loved them because they haven't followed a pattern. They've been, all of them in their own way. They've all been individual. So no, your books are at the top of my stacks of ones I've enjoyed interior-wise. So thank you. I am reading. I'm a bit of a nightmare for I have quite huge stacks of books that I sort of flip in and out of. I have just started the Peggy Guggenheim biography, just simply because we've just been there and I wanted to know more. There's a lot of books, there's a lot of flicking, there's a lot of magazines, there's a lot of podcasts. I'm not very good. I tend to find that I read when I'm on holiday. Properly when I'm on holiday, and I dip in and out of, I might read a chapter of something and then flick to the next book. And I have books that I come back to, like I love. Have you ever read The House in Good Taste by Elsie de Wolfe?
No.
Oh, it's a really old book. She was one of America's sort of first interior decorators.
Oh, yeah, no,
it's a really old book.
Yeah.
And I love sort of dipping back into things like that.
Okay. No, well, you've mentioned Big Magic, which is, that's a great book, and it's a great audiobook as well. I've read it and I've listened to the audiobook as well, which she reads so greatly. Well, you mentioned podcasts.
She does.
Yeah. What podcasts do you enjoy listening to, or audiobooks or music? What do you enjoy listening to?
I really enjoy this podcast, and I would be saying that as I'm chatting to you, but genuinely, I've really enjoyed all the people that you've interviewed on here. And the same with I Swoon. I've really enjoyed More Than One Thing. She's interviewed some great people. In fact, R.W. Guild, Raymond and Williams they're other people that inspire. Her podcast with them, I thought was brilliant. Gabby Roslin, who you probably don't have in Australia, she has a podcast called Midpoint, and she interviews sort of 50-something females and males from fashion, beauty, sporting. Her podcast is brilliant. I've just finished. I do like Audible books, so I've just finished Anna Murphy's Destination Fabulous. She's the Times fashion director. Who's just written a brilliant book, and I am listening at the moment to, and I didn't sort of know what to expect from it, but Jenna Kushta, if I pronounce that correctly.
Jenna Kushta. Yeah.
Yes. How are you? I'm really enjoying that. Her book. It's really interesting, and again, it's interesting to see those insights behind the people that you see appear regularly on your feeds. And I didn't sort of expect her to be quite as down to earth as she was. I've really enjoyed. I'm enjoying listening to that. I find Audible books, sort of walking the dog, and podcasts much more, sort of fit in much more with our life, rather than me sitting down and finding sort of 3 hours to sit and read properly. One day.
No, I love listening to podcasts, and or if I'm doing a big drive, an audiobook, I'll definitely do that. There's very long distances in Australia, so it's very possible.
Yes.
And I mean, you've sort of touched on this already, but maybe there's something else that comes to mind about what piece of advice would you give to your younger self? Is there anything else that comes to mind?
I again, sort of, we said this, but be you, and realize that being you is okay, and at whatever stage that is. There's, I think particularly if you've got some kind of learning difficulty, dyslexia, or you're not as completely academic as others around you. I definitely see that with the kids at school, that they've both been, they've done well, but they're academic schools, and not all kids are like that. And if you're not, then being creative in those environments is probably further down the pecking order. So I think just don't lose the desire to be creative if it's not something that is as prominent in your younger years. As kids it always is. I think in your teens it can be something, 20s it can be something that peters off slightly, but don't lose that. Do it for you. I think honesty and integrity are, for me, they're really important. They're just some really important values to keep with you at all times. I think that will stand you in really good stead as you get older. If you're always honest and people trust you, then, I think integrity for me is probably one of the most important things of anything, and kindness.
Yeah.
And and with your home, I think the notion of home is changing, isn't it now? I think we're all very lucky that we've all got onto the property ladder, and I think for younger generations that could be quite a different journey in the future. And I think just realise that home doesn't, and just we all write interior books, and we're lucky to have written. I'm very lucky. You're lucky. We've got beautiful book deals, and we have lovely interior businesses that we're proud of and that we are passionate about. But the notion of creating a space could be, it can be a caravan, it can be a shack, it doesn't have to be this all singing, all dancing, huge house. I've got a friend's daughter at the moment who is converting a transit van. She's finished her master's, and she started her first job with sort of a quite sustainable company, and she can work from anywhere. So she's literally converting a transit van into this very cool home. And I think it's just the idea of home for me is it's a precious one. But for kids starting out, that can be your room. It can be your, it doesn't have to be, it can be what you want it to be. It's about creating a space that you feel comfortable in and that sort of appeals to your senses. And as you shut that front door and that's your space. I think it's just, being realistic about and ambitious, but not feeling bad for where you are at that stage of your life is, I think it's really important for young people to take away.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I mean, I almost want to end on that because I feel like it's such a beautiful note to end on. But my curiosity is really piqued about your own children growing up in a home that has obviously, you've invested a lot of time and energy into your own home, working in the world of interiors. Has that seeped into their sensibility? Are they creative? Like, do you think they will go on to have creative careers, or are they have they gone completely the opposite direction? As someone who's got, younger children, I'm always fascinated to sort of see how that plays out. I mean, I've got 4 children. They're all so different, and I can already kind of get a glimpse of I can see in some ways what they might end up becoming because it's so innate partly in them. And I'm just curious about you with your children who are obviously older. How's that played out?
I think they really appreciate living in a creative home. So Grace is our elder. She's 20, and she's just had a year off. And she wanted to. She had a place at Edinburgh to go and do sports marketing degree, but has declined. She didn't go. So she had a gap year, worked for a couple of sports marketing agencies, and then went to learn to be a ski instructor, and then spent the next 5 months traveling. But she was very lucky. She had two brilliant sports companies give her a break, and one later took her on for 6 months. And another sports agency, when she came back from Canada doing the ski instructor course, she went to work for them for 6 weeks, and they offered her a job, and she's accepted that. So she hasn't gone down the university route. And, for me, again, writing the end pages in Create, it makes me quite emotional chatting about it, because I think from one hand, as a mum, you sort of think, oh gosh, I really want you to go to university and have that experience, not just because of the qualification, but the experience. But actually, she's made writing about the notion of creating freely. She's living proof that she's doing that. And that makes me really happy. She's working with a really buzzy young agency on Formula One and Premier League football, and she's loving it. And hasn't been made to feel that she's the lowest in the company, but she's got huge ambitions and didn't want to come out of uni with the debts, and, just wanted to get on. So I love her for that. And she's now living in Clapham. You lived in London for a bit, and she's living in Clapham with friends. And so she's sort of left home, which is really good. And I think suddenly it's hilarious. I do look around our house and I keep thinking, gosh, where's that gone? And I go and visit her in her little apartment, and she's, these things are popping up, and she's suddenly really embracing the idea of creating a home and loving it. And Archie, our youngest, who's nearly 18, he wants to wants a year off. He's literally about to do his A-levels in a couple of weeks. But he wants to do a politics and international relations degree. So, very different, completely different to his sister, completely different to me. I mean, wouldn't float my boat, but I love that, the chats you have with him, they're just being themselves. They're both following their own little pathway, which I love.
And that's ultimately, I think we almost started with that. And yeah, that's ultimately what you want, isn't it? To sort of follow the things that light somebody up and, are fulfilling, and yeah, it's representation of who they are. So, yeah,
it is,
great.
and it's so lovely. And I think it's a very precious. They're really precious years. Suddenly, they're all precious, aren't they? The ages your guys are at, it's really special. But suddenly, we have a house full of teenagers and friends, and Grace has certainly got friends that do want to go down. And the same with Archie. Archie's got a friend at school who's a most amazing woodworker, and I think they enjoy chatting because actually their parents are probably more corporate. So what I love is, particularly, I love helping their friends that are creative. Grace is at that stage. She's been incredibly lucky that she's had really good advice. So I think what I just love is, as adults, I think it's about us, or whatever it is we do, that we make that space to try and give back a little bit to, the generation coming up through the ranks, as I think they are. It's exciting. It's where we were at, and it feels like yesterday. And actually, it's quite a long 30 years ago for me. So that's quite a loss of time has passed, but it doesn't feel like it. So it is exciting. They're lucky, aren't they? I think if we can all do that, if they can be surrounded by role models, that gives me pleasure. And there's something else to add to the list on that. I love what Samantha Wills is doing with her foundation. I think I loved her interview with you, but I read her book. I remember ordering it from Booktopia when it first came out. And she fascinated me because I think she's young and she's hungry, and it has, she laid her heart bare, didn't she, in that book. But again, I think almost every school kid should read that, because it inspired me at my age. I think it would inspire them. It's just, just believe in yourself. I think that's, I said at the beginning of the interview, the headhunter I met, who said, you can be anything you want to be, just believe it. And those words are really, they do resonate with me regularly. And I think, your kids, my kids, if they all listen to things like that, then they will end up where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. No, the beautiful way to end. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I've loved learning more about you, your journey, your books, how they came about, all of the things, parenting advice. We've got it all in there. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
Really appreciate it.
I've loved chatting with you. And as I say, I'd love to do the flip. So I've got so many questions I'd love to ask you. So thank you. It's much appreciated.
All of the links and info for this episode are at nataliewalton.com/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can get a direct download of the latest episode. And I really appreciate when you take a minute to rate and review, as well as share the love with someone you know who might benefit from this episode, or on social media. If you'd like to access a range of free resources, come visit my website, nataliewalton.com. Thank you to Jaeger Media for producing this podcast. And I would also like to acknowledge the people of the Bundjalung Nation where it was recorded, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I look forward to connecting again soon. I'm Natalie Walton, and you've been listening to Imprint.